Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, Charlie Robinson, and I wanted Charlie to pretty much tell us what he's been up to, why he wanted to come back on the X22 Report Spotlight. But first, Charlie, welcome to the Spotlight.
Thanks for having me back, Dave. I love that when you put the graphic up with the picture with the blue neon outline, I look kind of like Ace Frehley's solo album from the 1970s.
Yeah, when you're speaking, I put the outline on there so people know that you're speaking. And this is on all interviews, not just yours. I mean, I do it for everyone now.
I look like a dorkier, balder version of Ace Frehley.
I just wanted you to give people a little bit of your background and what you've been working on and what you've been doing. So the stage is yours.
First time we spoke, it was about my book, The Octopus of Global Control. And one of the things that got me sort of started on that book was the fact that I lived through the real estate boom and bust in Las Vegas. And part of my awakening was the John Perkins book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, showing how, the World Bank and IMF kind of manipulate these countries into getting themselves in big debts for things like hydroelectric power plants and then, calling the note in and putting the screws to them. So as I'm reading that book, I'm sort of living the localized version of that in Las Vegas, watching the housing market go up, 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 and then all of a sudden it pops. So my background was that I started in 2003 in new home sales in Las Vegas, and things were as hot as it could be. I mean, it was people literally camping out in our parking lot so that they could be the first in line the following morning when we had a drawing to see who would be allowed to buy one of the lots that we had. And one of the things that was, obviously unsustainable was that, we would have price sheets that were really well done and they would have a price on it and then a sticker next to it that said 5% price increase September 15th or whatever, just make a date like 2 or 3 weeks out. So what that did was it created this sort of unnatural frenzy, and this, drove, of course, investors into the place like crazy. So, in the end, we didn't really care who we sold to, if it was a owner-occupied or an investor. Probably preferable for the community standpoint for it to be owner-occupied, but in the end, a sale was a sale. So we had all these investors come piling in, and of course, the home builders react to that by acquiring a ton of land, as much as they could get their hands on, because this boom seems like it's never going to end. So there comes a point, though, where the prices start to flatten out a little bit, and then they start to dip. Now, when they dip, these builders, they have land that's in development, and they can't afford for this to go down. They probably paid too much for the land to begin with, with the expectation that the prices of the homes would continue to go up. So as the sales stall out, they come up with new ideas for how to generate and how to boost sales. So one of them is just incentives, as sort of a broad topic. Now, they would do things like put money towards your closing costs. They would give you a credit to buy down your interest rate, and all those things are fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when that doesn't work, they increase the incentives even more. So then you get sort of like, if you imagine like a bucket of incentive money to play with, let's say it's $100,000. Buying a $500,000 house. Now you can take that as a buyer and just take it right off the price of the house and take that price down to $400,000, buy the house. Or you could use that money to, buy down your interest rate, cover your closing costs. And then we sat in a sales meeting this one day and our boss said, listen, we're going to allow people to use this incentive money to do, get a little creative with it. Let them pay down their credit cards, pay off their car loans. So, of course, I raised my hand and I said, have we cleared this with our legal department? And I'll never forget my manager's response. He said, I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. And we all just went, oh, this is bad, because we're licensed. We're licensed. We could lose our license for stuff like this. So we watched this kind of happen. And the market tanked. So in part because people saw all these incentives and they're like, hey, this is great. And then they took a step back and realized, oh, this is really, really bad. Because if you have to incentivize people to buy houses, how valuable are the houses really? So once that happened, we started to see things turn, and it just cratered. And the reason why I'm having this conversation with you is that, frankly, I'm seeing a lot of the same things now that I saw in the good times leading up to the bad times. It was great. And then all of a sudden, it was horrible. And so I'm seeing these parallels. So if anyone has ever watched the movie or read the book, The Big Short, I mean, when I saw that movie, it was like a documentary to me because it was so accurate, how these things were happening. And part of the reason why it was happening was because of our good friends at the Federal Reserve. They just expanded. If you remember back in 2001, Greenspan slashed the Fed rate from 6.5% all the way down to 1%. And then, of course, things went insanely crazy. But then he started ratcheting it up a little bit more over time. And then by the time it was 2006, the rate was back up to 5.25. And then, that tanked the market. We're seeing some of the same things in terms of sales in Las Vegas in particular. They're very alarming. The sales are great. Prices are up like 44% just over the last 3 years. Days on the market's cut in half. The number of homes for sales cut in half. I mean, there's all these things that are really, really great if this is your first time in the real estate game. But for me, second time around, I swore to myself that I would be cautious and I would recognize the signs when I see them. And I think I see them.
Now, you're seeing the same exact thing that we saw prior to 2008. Not the exact, but, it rhymes.
For sure. Yeah. So some of the things, the good news is the foreclosures have been sort of, run through the system. There are very few of those. The mortgage industry right now, they're making a lot of loan programs available, which is good. But now we're starting to see something like jumbo loans that are offering, that are allowed, 5% down only. That's kind of unheard of. And when you see that to me is a bit, I'd be cautious with that, because if you're allowing people to only put 5% down on a jumbo loan, then you're also acknowledging that they could walk away from and only lose 5%. So these are things that investors see, or people that just say, hey, I want to, I've got a house right now, but maybe I want to buy an investment home. So what we are seeing is refinancing is booming, crazy, but we're also seeing the cash out refinances allowing up to 95% to be pulled out, which is, on the one hand, it's good news because it shows that people have equity in their homes. On the other hand, they're treating them like ATM machines. And that's the same thing that sort of started us down that path last time around. Everyone, had a house that was worth a whole lot more than what they paid for it. And then they did a cash out refi and went and bought a house down the street as an investment property. And then that is what we're seeing. Of course, we're also seeing a mass exodus from California. And I think everyone understands why. That's not really anything too unusual, but that's fueling Nevada and Arizona for sure. They're getting a lot of sales from that. And then we're also just seeing a major spike in people just buying a second home in Las Vegas. And a lot of times that is more connected to the international markets. In Canada, if you have a really strong Canadian dollar, then that spikes prices, or that spikes sales in Palm Springs, Las Vegas, Phoenix, areas like that, because they come in and want to get a place down south. And also when you have China, booming like it is, then you'll see purchases either because people have a lot of money in China and they feel prosperous, or they're scared to death of their government and they want to get their money out of there. But you'll see purchases in Vancouver and Seattle and Los Angeles along the West Coast. So, we're seeing all these things, but these are also the things we saw the tail end of 2006, right before we hit a major slide.
Do you see foot traffic starting to slow at all or anything like that?
What we're seeing is realtors being offered higher commissions by the new home builders and also bonuses. Now, the home builders and the realtors have a very contentious relationship. When things are good, the home builders pretend like the realtors don't exist. When things are bad, they kiss the realtors' asses as hard as they can because they know they've got the buyers. So the fact that you see realtor bonuses is an indication that you're seeing lower traffic. So that is, and that of course is going to be alarming to the new home builders. When they see lower traffic, then they start to say, well, let's do what we can. That's incentives and realtor bonuses. And once you see that, although as a buyer, you think, hey, this is great, I'm getting an incentive, the truth of the matter is they're incentivizing it because it's not worth what it was. So it's probably not if you're a buyer and you're seeing a large incentive in a new home community, be wary of that.
Are there any sales out there where people, I mean, we saw this prior to 2008, where people started to lower their prices? Because I'm on the East Coast and I see that prices are being reduced here just to get people to come. I don't know what's happening in Vegas. Are you seeing anything like that?
Actually, the prices have been going up. But when the prices go down, what you'll see is, first thing, they'll try to disguise it. They'll make it look like the prices aren't going down. So you'll do things like you'll give away anything that isn't connected with the price of the house. If you're talking about if you're a new home company, you'll give away incentives towards covering closing costs and buying down interest rates, because those things don't reflect in the home price. If you're just somebody that is just a typical person that's putting their home on the market, you're not as concerned about lowering the price because you're sort of out of there. You don't have as long of a stake as the new home builders do, but you might see things like offering credits for repairs and things like that. So what we would be looking for to see when it has finally peaked is the number of days on the market is a pretty good indicator. You'll start to see that creep up. Right now, it's been down for a long time. But what that does is it fuels more people into this sort of, into this fervor of speculation. And once you get all the speculators in, then things tend to go wrong. So the probably the most concerning thing that we're seeing is the number of cash out refinances, and then the percentage, the fact that you can pull almost all of your money out of a house. That is a recipe for disaster. If things continue to keep going up, it's fine. If you're buying another house, or if you're using that money to pay off your credit cards and things like that, there's actually some logic to that. If you've got a home rate that's 5%, but you've got credit cards that are 13%, then yeah, cash out refi, pay off your credit cards. But when the home prices start to go down, remember, now you've got a much larger mortgage to take care of. And so this is sort of the behavior that put a lot of people in a bad spot back in 2007.
So, I mean, these cash outs, are these being done by speculators or to purchase another house, or are these, families that are moving in saying, I need the cash?
It's mostly family speculators. It's people that have, they're just a typical family that has a house, but then they want to get in on this. They've seen the prices go up. They want to pull their money out. They want to buy an investment house down the street. I did that. I did that during the boom and everything. I walked right into that trap. Things were good. I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I believed it. There was a lot going on, and I believed that, people were coming from California. The prices were a third of the price of California. It made sense for people to move to Las Vegas. It made sense for people to move to Phoenix. So yeah, hey, I'll pull the cash out of my current house and go use that to buy another house. And that's fine. If the game keeps going. But the problem with this is the musical chairs, when the music stops, they don't just pull one chair out. They tend to pull a bunch of chairs out. And the people that are the average investor tends to get creamed on this. I think the institutional investors that we deal with, they're sitting on the sidelines. They've seen this before. They don't need to sell at the very top. They're content to sort of take their money out of the system and wait. And that's a very disciplined thing to do. And it's really hard. It's really hard to do that when the media is pushing the narrative that everything's great, everything's going to get better. We don't have to worry about, you don't have to worry about anything. We're going to be fine. This market's going to go up forever. Of course, we all know that doesn't happen. And so for me, one of the things I look at is some of these, I would call them like wild cards, really. You've got things like what happens if there's a massive drop in the stock market? What happens if we have currency issues in the United States? What happens if we have currency issues in other countries? I mean, that's definitely a possibility. We have political uncertainty that can be a factor. You've got, political uncertainty in places like China and Japan can impact Seattle. Uncertainty in South America, like we're seeing in Venezuela, can affect Miami's real estate market, and Europe can affect New York. I mean, so because we're so globalized, all these things are interconnected. So yes, real estate is local in a sense, but there's a global tie to it, and a lot of that has to do with currency. I mean, if you see a drop in the stock market, people are going to feel like they're losing their money and they're poor. Maybe they decide, well, I'm going to sell my rental house, or I'm going to sell this big house and downsize to something else. So then you see a bunch of houses go on the market. That, of course, drives prices down, and it starts this death spiral that we had last time. So I'm very concerned about some of the things that are kind of out of our control as a real estate from an investment standpoint. Things like, the dollar becoming worthless. God, of course, we're listening to Kim.com say, get in gold, your dollar's going to be worthless. And I tend to listen to that guy. He seems to have a pretty good sense of what's happening. So if something like that were to happen, I mean, it doesn't matter how hot your market is, it'll pull the plug on everything.
I mean, we see the real estate markets in Canada where prices are starting to come down. Australia, prices are starting to come down. Even on the East Coast in New York and Manhattan, prices are coming down in certain areas. And this looks like it's the beginning stages. And when I think back to 2006, 2007, 2008, you didn't see it all happen in the same exact place. I mean, you saw New York where all of a sudden traffic started to dry up, but down in Florida, they were building like crazy, and it didn't hit Florida until like 8 or 9 months later. And I think what the Fed has done and certain hedge funds and investment companies, they've pumped these bubbles up in certain cities, 20 of them, which Case-Shiller looks at. And, you're seeing the prices move up to, all-time highs like we've never seen before in these cities. And I think on the outskirts in many of the other smaller towns and other places, you're starting to see things crash down there first. And I think this is why we might be seeing mortgage applications starting to decline, origination starting to decline. And yes, I know the interest rate is moving up, but we're starting to see signs that things are not going well at all.
Well, I remember when the bust happened, everything came on the market. Everything was a short sale. Everything was a foreclosure, and the sales obviously stalled out. But then all of a sudden they picked up, and so I started talking to the title companies that I knew, and they all said the same thing. It's hedge fund money moving in. So Goldman Sachs had their vulture funds, and of course Chase did, and all these companies that they had set up funds that were, titled something. It wasn't Goldman Sachs Vulture Fund was the title or anything like that, but they made it look like it wasn't them, but they were quietly buying up as much as they could get their hands on and then turning them into rentals, and this is what the Fed does. They pump up the money supply and then they pull it back, and they catch people in a bad spot, and then they come in there and pick up houses for, 20 cents on the dollar, which is exactly what was happening. So it's a boom and bust cycle, much like, as we see with the fiat currency. We understand the scam. We know that how they do it. We know why they do it, and we know how it benefits them. It's really no different when it comes to the mortgage industry. They'll expand the credit supply and let everybody get a house. I remember selling a house to a guy who had, quite literally his job was he worked picking oranges. And I was like, good for you, man, that you can buy a house, but this is probably not going to end well because you really don't make enough money to qualify for it. But they found creative ways to make it work. And I'm sure that guy had a foreclosure on his hands. I mean, it just had to be. So they have, of course, no love for us as the consumer. We'll never see it coming. They'll never announce it in advance that things are going to happen. But you're right. When some cities lag behind others, and that may be the case here. So when I talk about Las Vegas, because I have a direct knowledge of that, because that's where I work, but it isn't to say that what I see in Las Vegas is the exact same that you'll see in Sacramento or in Minneapolis or someplace like that. It is localized, but you can still look for the same sort of signs that that things are going to turn badly. Obviously, prices will stall. Obviously, they'll start to decrease, and if a rise in interest rate will affect that, that's obvious. But things like checking to see the number of days on the market, if that starts to rise, then that there's a reason for that. Things aren't selling. And in the realtor community, you'll see like I said, offering extra commissions. But just if you're a regular person that just gets the Sunday paper, if they even still make those anymore, you open it up in the back and you'll see the ads for all the builders. When you start to see the ad saying, hey, come down to this new community that we're opening, we're offering $75,000 of incentives. that's a sign not to go to that community. I'm sorry to say for the home builders, but that's a sign of weakness, not a sign of strength.
So, I mean, during the crisis, the housing crisis that we saw back in 2008, 2009, 10, 11, the rental market kind of, increased with people looking to rent because, they lost their house, there were foreclosure, short sales, you name it. And the rental market started to pick up because a lot of people were renting because they couldn't purchase. How is the rental market going in Vegas?
Well, the rental market is really strong, actually. In fact, over the last couple of years, the rate has increased by 9%. So that means there are more people renting than there were a couple years ago. And the reason for that is because as the prices go up, obviously more people get locked out. If you look at a city like Los Angeles, I mean, there comes a point where you are either in or you are out of the buying market for Los Angeles. You just don't make enough money to qualify. And that's 2/3 of the people. Actually, in Los Angeles, it's 64% of the people. In Miami, it's 70% of the people are renters, and they're renting for a variety of reasons. One might be, they got dinged with a foreclosure or short sale on their credit, and so they're hampered that way. They might not have a job anymore. That's obviously a reason to rent instead of buy. Things have been getting more and more expensive. I can't believe anybody can buy in New York City, but surprisingly, it's only 68% of the people are renters. So things get expensive, obviously, but then there's something else that is kind of unusual that people need to factor in, and that is that millennials are classified as anyone born in 1980 to 1998. Even though they account for like the largest segment of the market, of the buying market, their attitude is that very different towards buying a house than, say, our parents was. They don't see purchasing a house as the crowning achievement of their lives the way that baby boomers do. So they might buy a house, but they don't have a problem renting either. So some of these people, some of the millennials, have either witnessed their parents go through this foreclosure and short sale bust that we had, but they've also grown up in the new era, like the Uber era, where they're sharing assets. They don't own a car. They're sharing, they're just, using a car at will. So they don't have this view of owning a house as being the end all be all of their life. They can sort of take it or leave it. If it's going to hamper if it's going to hinder their social life, and they're not going to have money to go out and do the things they want to do, then they don't care. Then they're not interested in doing that. So that is something to look for as the millennials, which currently account for 36% of the buying market, but as they get older, they might not turn into the home buyers that our parents did as they moved into their prime earning age. And also, don't forget, half of them have student debt. So that's a huge hindrance towards getting qualified. So, they're getting out of college and maybe they're not having the best job in the world. On top of that, they're already, have that debt clock ticking and getting strangled by it. So there's a couple things. So that's not a good sign, actually, for the housing market moving forward, because you're going to have fewer buyers. You're going to have more students coming out of college that have debt and therefore not even considering buying as an option.
And that's going to hurt the next generation of home buyers because, if they have the student debt and a lot of these individuals aren't finding the high-paying jobs like a couple years ago, this is going to make it more and more difficult for them to purchase the house. Now, add on top of that, housing prices, they're continually moving up. Some places, yes, they're dipping down now, but interest rates are moving up. So this is like, whammy on top of whammy that's going to really hit the real estate market.
For sure. So you would be if you're an investor, taking that into consideration, you'd probably be looking at multifamily. There's a huge building boom here. There's a building boom in Las Vegas. There's a building boom in Denver. Denver has 15,000 projected apartment deliveries for 2018 alone, but they have a problem. There's not enough skilled multifamily construction workers to fill that, or else that number would be even higher. So we're starting to see a shift towards not just multifamily in a sense of apartment complexes, but multi-generational living too, where you might have a home that has a guest house in the back, and that is a family in their 40s who has, have elderly parents. They want them to be close, but not too close. So they have a little guest house back there. Or else it's a family that has a kid that just graduated from college, doesn't know what they want to do. They have a little room there. So we're seeing a move towards that, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. It keeps the costs low. It keeps family units connected a little closer together. And then there's also the people that just buy a house like that with a guest house in the back to generate a little bit of rental income without committing to being like a full-fledged landlord, somebody that owns like an apartment complex itself. So these trends that's sort of where it's headed. Multi-generational type living. Of course, we're seeing tiny houses, which I don't know how long that will last, but it might be a nice replacement for, say, mobile homes. They have kind of a negative stereotype. If you could get rid of those and put tiny houses there, then you have tiny houses, which doesn't have that stigma of being like a tornado magnet. So, these are the things that the builders have to consider moving forward. If we're not going to have a whole lot of buyers, we need to have the ability to. We need to change up our products. And new home builders are notorious for being for lacking in creativity, I guess is the way to put it. They just they just copy each other, whether it's floor plans or colors or whatever. This is in this year, home office is in, great. Formal dining room goes away, that's fine. But we're now starting to see some of them are getting smart and figuring out, hey, look, there's a market here for multi-generational. We've watched immigrant families come to the United States and live that sort of lifestyle for a while. And I think that the Americans the traditional Americans that have been here for a long time are now starting to pick up on that. And I think it's probably a smart way to go. So I would expect more of that in the way of whether it's a house with a guest house or it's a little detached casita, or maybe a place that has its own, maybe just a back door that's separate that gives a little bit of privacy. That's definitely coming.
So, we're talking about the real estate market and people refinancing. Wells Fargo, they decided to lay off about 690 people from their mortgage department because of their declining mortgage apps and originations. Is this going to affect the market at all?
Yeah, of course. Frankly, everyone at Wells Fargo can go away as far as I'm concerned. I don't think we would be missing them. But yeah, it's a sign that when mortgage applications decline, you're going to see less purchases that way. I think they tend to be a little bit ahead of the curve. I would expect mortgage companies to do what I saw right when the bust happened, and that was literally day by day, mortgage programs would go away. You'd have a buyer that was qualified. They had this loan, they were ready to do it, and then we'd get the call and say, that loan program that we had, it's just they don't offer it anymore. Like, well, what happened? Well, they just got rid of it yesterday. Okay, so fine. You move them into another one. So right now we see a pretty broad variety of mortgage packages available, mortgage types, down payments. Down payment assistance has been a big thing, but down payment assistance is running out of money. So we're not seeing as many of those. So first, I would expect that you'll see a consolidation of the type of loans that are available. They'll start to shrink, and then you'll see what Wells Fargo is doing, getting rid of those people. They have no love for any of their employees. Of course, they don't care. They just look at the numbers. If the numbers seem a little low, they'll get rid of those people. If the numbers pick back up, they'll hire new ones. That's an industry that has a whole lot of turnover. I don't even think that there's all that much quality control in the mortgage industry. At least during the boom that we had before, it was people were like, I'm a stripper / loan originator, and you just like shake your heads and go, this can't be a good sign. So yeah, if you start to see more of that, more of the firing in the mortgage industry, that would obviously be a good sign that to maybe reevaluate what you're doing. I know people that have said, okay, I'm not going to get burned second time around. I'm selling my house right now, and I'm going to move into a rental unit and be as disciplined as I can, and then take advantage of when things fall and come back in and be a buyer a couple years later. Now that requires a lot of discipline. And I know a couple people that have done it, and I give them a ton of credit, but But that might not be an option for everybody that's that has a family of a couple kids. They might not have the flexibility to do that. They might not be able to move and leave their school district. So there's a lot of factors to take into consideration. I would just caution people on the cash out refis, just because that has a tendency, even if you're very conservative with the way you spend it, if other people around you aren't, they can mess up the market pretty quickly.
I mean, where do you see the real estate market going? I mean, from your contacts and from what you've been seeing in Vegas and other areas, how much longer do you think this boom is going to last?
Well, it's hard to say. It's just that because they never announce when it's going to crater out. It just depends on how greedy people want to be. If people say that I'm an investor, I've been in this market for a couple of years now, things have been good, much like the stock market. You can really just look at it like the stock market. Is it going to continue to go up? Dow 50,000? I don't know. Maybe. Is the real estate market going to go up? It has been. When it's good, it never seems like it's going to get bad. When it's bad, it never seems like it's going to get any better. You factor in things like the potential derivatives bubble. Even things, a dollar collapse is realistic, I think. These are things that are major game changers. So if somebody has the flexibility, I would say that it's probably about as hot as it's going to get. Maybe you don't get out at the very top of the market, but if it were up to me, I would be advising our clients to maybe sit on the sidelines for a little while and see how things go. You might not be able to milk every single percentage out of this real estate boom, but we've had a pretty good run. We know how cyclical things get. We know how manipulated things really are, and we know how fragile the economy of the United States is currently. So. You might want to take your chips off the table and cash out.
Charlie, hey, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on here.
Thanks so much. If anyone wants to take a look at our work, you can find us at alterluxury.com, ALTERLUXURY.com.
Great. I'll put that link at the bottom of the video so it makes it a lot easier for people to get over there. Thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.